Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirms that Israel coordinates actions with the U.S. against the Houthis and says operations will continue. Israeli occupation forces expand their offensive in the Gaza Strip. And Lebanon's army says Hamas handed over a member suspected of launching rockets at Israel in March. These were the headlines, the news in detail. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that Israel has coordinated actions against the Houthis, with the U.S. emphasizing that these efforts will continue in the future. He also provided an update on the ongoing conflict in Gaza, noting that the furious fighting and Israel's commitment to completely eliminating Hamas. Netanyahu reported that the loss of 2 soldiers and announced that a new combat proposal would be reviewed today. He alleged that the focus remains on bringing detainees home and defeating Hamas. Lufthansa, Air Europa, Air France, Austrian and Swiss airlines have decided not to operate flights today to and from Tel Aviv after a ballistic missile from Yemen struck an area at the country's main Ben Gurion airport. Hungarian low-cost airline giant Wizz Air also announced the cancellation of its flights to Israel for the next 48 hours. The cancellations come despite the reopening of the airport an hour after the attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to hold a meeting with Defense Minister Israel Katz and other top defense officials after the Houthis in Yemen struck Ben Gurion airport with a ballistic missile. The meeting will examine potential responses, including a direct Israeli strike on Houthi assets in Yemen. Netanyahu will convene his security cabinet in person to discuss the expansion of the military campaign in Gaza, fighting in Syria, the Houthi attack, and more. A ballistic missile launched from Yemen has hit the perimeter of Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport, damaging a road and a vehicle and causing air traffic to stop. The Israeli occupation military confirmed its defense system failed to shoot down the projectile despite several attempts to intercept it, adding that an investigation was underway. Yemen's Houthis claimed responsibility for the missile launched at Israel's busiest airport. Yemen's Houthis have claimed responsibility for a missile launched at Israel's Ben Gurion airport. Houthi spokesman Yahya Saria said the group carried out a hypersonic ballistic missile strike targeting Ben Gurion International Airport outside Tel Aviv this morning. The statement claimed the strike successfully hit its target and urged international airlines to avoid the unsafe airport. And for more analysis, we now move to Salma Marwan in our newsroom. To you, Salma.
Thank you, Mona. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the political science professor Ayman El-Raqb. Welcome to Qnews, Mr. Ayman. And first off, could Israel increase its strikes on the Gaza Strip due to the Houthi missile attack?
Greetings to you and all the dear viewers. Of course, this is directly related that the occupation has never stopped its strikes on Gaza. This isn't related to the strike on the Ben Gurion airport or to anything else. There is a gradual plan carried out by the occupation, and they are now summoning the reserve for more operations. Of course, the meeting of the Israeli government has been postponed from this afternoon till 1 hour ago, and this is This meeting is still ongoing, and according to reports, this meeting will come with the outcome of a new mechanism to deal with the Gaza Strip. Yesterday there was an operation that targeted a number of the occupation soldiers, so the things might be escalated during the coming few hours.
So, would Israel use the Houthi attack to complicate the situation further regarding reaching a ceasefire agreement in Gaza?
Once again, I don't think that the Houthi strike was related to the Gaza Strip for Israel. These are two different issues. Israel will pressure the US with this strike, especially that there was a British US strike on the Houthis before. And as I have indicated, there has been an operation carried out by resistance against the occupation, and they are handling this operation now. We have seen a wide range of strikes on Gaza during the past few hours. What's going now? The occupation is now being targeted by Hamas, and these targeting moves by the occupations are very random, and the ongoing killing is not related to the Houthi strike or to anything else. It is a gradual plan that is being carried out meticulously by the occupation to evacuate the Palestinian population.
Now, sir, what is to be expected from the Israeli public? Will they exert more pressure on Netanyahu in the upcoming period to reach a ceasefire agreement?
I think that the Israeli public now has a very limited influence. In his meeting yesterday with the defense minister, they said that the Israeli street has very limited influence, and the operation on Gaza is sacrificing soldiers as they are being targeted by the resistance, and that's why the Israeli street needs to move further. And there has been calls before for the Israeli street, but it is still without really real influence. We have seen calls for early elections, and we have seen also calls to strike Iran, and that the current government, if they do not do that, they need to leave office immediately. But so far, the Israeli street has really limited influence, even to bring back the Israeli detainees. But they do not have any plan for a political process. They only want to bring back their detainees. And I think that the Israeli public doesn't really not care about the volume of violence taking place in Gaza. We have seen pictures of babies being killed by the occupation, and no objection from the Israeli street.
Lastly, sir, how do you see the American and Israeli responses in the coming period to the Houthi attack on the Ben Gurion airport?
I think that the US will keep bombing Yemen, and the Israeli occupation, of course, will exert some effort in this regard. They are relying on the US mainly, and if they do not see the results that they hope for, they will directly strike. This is very dangerous. The missile was directed to the Ben Gurion airport, and the Israeli air defense system, as well as the US system, failed to intercept this missile. Of course, this failure to protect the Ben Gurion airport will trigger a direct reaction. Unfortunately, they don't know that fighting these militias should not be by military operation. Even what they are doing in Gaza, they are fighting ghosts, and the ones bearing the brunt are the civil innocent citizen.
From Cairo, that was the political science professor Ayman El-Raqb. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And now we go back to Mona in our studio.
Thank you so much, Salma. And now we move on to the latest developments in Gaza. Israeli occupation forces have expanded their offensive in the Gaza Strip. The occupation military began issuing tens of thousands of emergency reserve call-up orders. The call-up marks the 6th or 7th round of mobilization for many reservist brigades since the war began 17 months ago. The occupation military said the pressure on Hamas would increase incrementally, and the call-up of the reservists was part of its staged plans. Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Albares has discussed the dire famine situation in Gaza with UNRWA chief Philip Lazzarini. In a social media post, Albares called for Israel to allow humanitarian aid into the besieged area, emphasizing the urgent need for food supplies to save lives. Gaza's health ministry has issued an urgent appeal for fuel, warning that hospitals are on the brink of running out. While some fuel is stored at designated sites, the ministry says aid groups are unable to access or transport it because Israel has declared those areas off limits. If no new fuel arrives, hospitals will run out within 3 days and may be forced to shut down, the ministry added. The World Health Organization, the WHO, has warned that Gaza's healthcare system is nearing total collapse, describing the humanitarian health situation as catastrophic after nearly 2 months without medical aid due to Israel's ongoing blockade. The WHO spokesperson Margaret Harris said Gaza's residents are deprived of essentials like food, water, shelter, and medical care, and fear of hospital attacks has kept many from seeking treatment. Hospitals face severe shortages of basic supplies with overcrowded conditions and a surge in trauma, injuries, and diseases exacerbating the crisis. Despite having stocked warehouses and teams on the ground, WHO says the continued blockade is preventing the delivery of life-saving aid. Harris warned that the situation is very close to the edge of the abyss. Gaza's government media office has reported that over 70,000 children are currently hospitalized due to severe malnutrition as Israel continues to block the entry of essential aid, including baby formula and nutritional supplements. According to the statement, more than 3,500 children under 5 are at risk of imminent death from starvation, with 290,000 others on the brink of death. It also highlighted that 1.1 million children in Gaza are lacking the minimum nutrition required for survival. The statement condemned the blockade, accusing Israel of using starvation as a weapon, while calling attention to the shameful international silence surrounding the crisis. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, the UNRWA, has called for urgent international action to prevent the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza from escalating further as Israel's total siege enters its 9th week. In a post on X, UNRWA stated that the situation is now beyond imagination, with vital supplies for survival completely blocked. The agency stressed the need for a concerted global effort to address the ongoing crisis. Lebanon's military has said Hamas has handed over one of its Lebanon-based members suspected of launching rockets towards Israel in March. According to a Lebanese military statement, the suspect was transferred at the entrance of the Ain al-Hilwa Palestinian refugee camp in southern Lebanon's Sidon and is now under investigation. The military added the detention followed a government directive aimed at preventing actions that risk pulling Lebanon into a regional conflict. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi reaffirmed Egypt's commitment to ensuring the success of the upcoming Arab summit in Baghdad and expressed Egypt's full support for Iraq's upcoming presidency of the Arab League summit. During his meeting with Iraq's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein, President al-Sisi received an official invitation to attend the 34th regular session of the Arab Summit and the 5th Arab Economic and Social Development Summit, both scheduled to be held in Baghdad on May 17, 2025. The official spokesperson stated that the meeting included an exchange of views on the situations in Palestine and Syria, with both sides firmly rejecting the displacement of Palestinians from their homelands. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and President of Comoros Azil Osmani have discussed regional and global developments, including the situation in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea security. Egypt and Comoros signed several agreements during talks between President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and President Azali Osmani, focusing on boosting bilateral cooperation, development and investment. The leaders discussed Gaza, Sudan, counterterrorism and African Union priorities, agreeing on unified African positions and fair global representation. President Sisi reaffirmed Egypt's support for Comoros' development plans, particularly the 2030 Emerging Comoros Plan, and expressed readiness to cooperate in sectors such as health, education, energy, and infrastructure. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has said that his country will not tie its future to nuclear negotiations with the United States. According to Iranian media, President Pezeshkian said that Iran is prepared to continue independently if nuclear talks with Washington become complicated, emphasizing the country's reliance on internal unity. In previous statements, he noted that domestic affairs are not dependent on the outcome of negotiations, though he expressed confidence that a peaceful resolution could lead to significant progress. He also stressed that the absence of an agreement would not necessarily result in difficulties for Iran. An Israeli newspaper has confirmed the accuracy of a Washington Post report regarding coordination between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the dismissed U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz concerning the Iranian file. Washington Post had quoted two sources stating that Waltz angered President Donald Trump as the U.S. National Security Advisor appeared to adopt Netanyahu's belief that the time had come to launch a military strike against Iran. It added that officials in Trump administration considered that Waltz was trying to tip the balance towards military action and that he was working in close coordination with the Israelis. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that a ceasefire with Russia in its more than 3 years old war is possible at any moment. Zelensky, speaking at a joint news conference in Prague alongside Czech President Petr Pavel, also said that Ukraine hopes to receive 1.8 million shells in 2025 under a Czech initiative to provide military assistance. Zelensky also said that unless increased pressure were applied, Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin would take no real steps to end the conflict. Marvel's ensemble superhero pick Thunderbolts has debuted to an even bigger $86.1 million overseas for a global launch of $162.1 million as it ticks off the summer box office. Marvel and Disney Thunderbolts soared to the top of the domestic chart with an estimated domestic opening of $76 million, slightly ahead of expectations for a superhero pick that featured lesser-known characters. One Marvel and Disney would not doubt have liked north of $80 million. Playability will be the biggest factor in terms of how the $180 million movie legs out. Overseas, the star-studded ensemble pick led by Florence Pugh and Sebastian Stan pulled in $86.1 million for a global start of $162.1 million.
I don't see your mistakes. That's why we need each other.
Okay, that was really good.
The Thunderbolts!
Can't call ourselves that.
God, thank you. We're gonna be some great saviors.
You can't even save yourself.
Police has thwarted a bomb attack planned for Lady Gaga's historic concert that drew over 2 million people in Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro. Local police said the plot was orchestrated by a group promoting hate speech and the radicalization of teenagers, including self-harm and violent content, as a form of social belonging. The Justice Ministry said the recruiters identified themselves as members of Gaga's global fan base, known as the Little Monsters. According to officials' data, 2.1 million people attended the American pop icon's free show. Security has been heightened around Vatican City as preparations intensify for the May 7th conclave to elect Pope Francis' successor. Around 133 cardinals under age 80 will gather in the Sistine Chapel to choose the next leader of 1.4 billion member Roman Catholic Church. Once elected, the new pope will be announced with white smoke and a public blessing from St. Peter's Basilica. Crowds of hundreds of thousands are expected in Rome, recalling the massive turnout for the late Pope's funeral, which drew over 400,000 people. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he will not dismiss Jerome Powell from his position as chair of the Federal Reserve before his term ends in May 2026, though he described Powell as completely rigid, reiterating his call for interest rates cuts. President Donald Trump said he expects the Federal Reserve to eventually lower interest rates, though he believes Jerome Powell has been hesitant due to personal differences. Despite his concerns, Trump dismissed the idea of firing Powell before his term ends in 2026, stating he would have the option to replace him when the time comes. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced he would extend the June 19th deadline for China-based ByteDance to divest TikTok's U.S. assets if no agreement is reached. Trump expressed his support for the app, which helped him connect with young voters during the 2024 election, and reassured that TikTok would be protected. Trump previously announced the extension on his Truth social platform, saying the TikTok deal requires more work to ensure all necessary approvals are signed. ByteDance has been in discussion with the U.S. government, adding that any agreement will be subject to approval under Chinese law. Well, that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirms that Israel coordinates actions with the US against the Houthis and says operations will continue. Israeli occupation forces expand their offensive in the Gaza Strip. And Lebanon's army says Hamas handed over a member suspected of launching rockets at Israel in March. Well, this concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Many thanks for watching.